Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, we'll look at why Montgomery County may give J.W. Marriott a $50 million tax break. That's on Coffee House Forum. Then on In Sickness and in Health, the whys, hows, and ethics of organ donations. Songstress Grace Griffith joins us for musical traditions, and on Writer's Block, we'll trail author Mark Hertsgaard around the world in search of our environmental future. Plus, a poem by Ilona Popper, the top 10 lists for book and CD sales and video rentals, the song and dance calendar, and a memoriam for Takoma's Roscoe the Rooster. Hi, and welcome to the Coffee House. In Animal Farm, George Orwell invented a society that claimed to be egalitarian, but where the pigs were more equal than the other beasties. Orwell was satirizing Soviet communism. But what about our own community? Well, you try this out. Go to the Montgomery County executive and threaten to move to Fairfax unless the county cuts your taxes and improves your services. No one else's, just yours. Now, if your name is John or Jane Smith, I'd wager you'll be laughed out of the office. But if your name is J.W. Marriott, you'll be escorted to a special seat at the table. Some animals are more equal. Perhaps that's just economic reality. A big company like Marriott employs lots of people who spend lots of money, which helps other businesses prosper, and they can then hire more people. As a matter of economic fact, John and Jane Smith just don't matter as much as J.W. Marriott. But that begs the question, what sorts of special deals should government make to attract and retain major employers? And what should we, us less equal taxpayers, expect in return? Here to discuss this is Kristina Ellis, marketing specialist with the Montgomery County Department of Economic Development, and Greg LeRoy, director of the Good Jobs First project of the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy in Washington, D.C. Welcome, both of you, to the Coffee House.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Kristina Ellis, we're hearing leaked from these negotiations between Montgomery County and Marriott that we're looking at a package, $50 to $58 million in value of tax breaks and improvements to roads, what have you, in order to attract, lure, or retain Marriott to build its headquarters, a new headquarters in Rockville, or stay in Bethesda. What is too much from the county's point of view in terms of what taxpayers should be prepared to offer to Marriott?
Well, first, let me backtrack and address a comment you made in the opening. Just want to let Mr. or Mrs. Jane Smith know that they certainly are welcome to come to Montgomery County. And in fact, we have our Business Resource Center, which was recently opened just this past summer, with this specific goal and target of helping small companies and entrepreneurs who are looking to either start a business or grow in Montgomery County. So just right off the bat, I want to say that while Marriott, being a long-standing traditional company here in the county with a history in the county and being a major employer, we certainly want to see them stay because they do contribute to the overall economic prosperity of the county.
They've been in their current location for over 4 decades now.
Right.
And it's possible that they're now saying, well, maybe we'd just like to stay there, and what are you prepared to do to keep us in our...
Well, I mean, certainly Marriott, as well as any other company, has a right to basically, you know, see what's out there. I mean, any company that has a you know, a site selector working in their best interest certainly has to look at all the options. You know, while I obviously can't talk or speak to the exact terms of the deal, I mean, I know there are figures floating around. We obviously feel that the positive impact that Marriott has now in the county is one that we would like to see stay here, and we would like to keep the company here.
And that positive impact involves keeping lots of jobs
here.
here.
Well, keeping the nearly 4,000 employees here in the county, contributing to our county's tax base. As you said, keeping those employees in either the Bethesda or Rockville area, eating at the local restaurants, you know, buying gas, shopping, and so forth.
Isn't it likely, though, that if Marriott were to move to Fairfax, for instance, that it's really just it's across the state line, but it's really a commute. A lot of people commute that far every day. Would we really lose all of those employees to Montgomery County if their kids are already in school in Montgomery County? Won't they really stay here?
Well, you know, I mean, that's really hard to say. I mean, each employee is going to have to weigh the odds and see if that makes sense for them to stay. I mean, wouldn't it be nice for them not to have to even weigh that factor and to just be able to stay in a county that offers them an exceptional quality of life, a wide variety of artistic and educational opportunities for their children, to not have to uproot their children and move them into a whole new public school system. So we just feel that, you know, obviously from the county's point of view, it would be a win-win for Montgomery County if they could just stay and expand. And
from the county's point of view, what is it that taxpayers, the citizens of Montgomery County, should get in return for Marriott agreeing to stay here, or Marriott staying here with a particularly lucrative package?
Well, there are, as I said, I can't, you know, get into the exact specifics of the deal, but there are always usually capital investment ends of any deal, and just the fact that you would still retain a major employer, again, is just going to contribute to the tax base, and, you know, perhaps be incentive for other large companies to stay and other companies to come and to grow and to keep the economy prospering and to keep, you know, unemployment down and just to keep contributing to the economy.
Greg LeRoy, Marriott could move to Fairfax County across the state line, where the sales taxes, the property taxes, the corporate taxes are all lower. And if they're looking to relocate and it isn't a major upset for them to move that short distance, why shouldn't they do that? And therefore, why, if Maryland is in a competitive disadvantage on tax terms, why shouldn't Maryland fatten the pie in order to attract Marriott to retain it here?
Well, this episode raises all the thorny issues about the way economic development is done today. Certainly Marriott has a self-interest to play the two states against each other, but there's so much history here and so many relationships and so many fairness issues, frankly. If Montgomery County fattens the pie, as you put it, to retain
Sweetens the pie.
this employer, right, who's next? Right? If it sends a signal to every major employer in the county that they can pull down 8 figures by making noise that they want to move a short distance, what's it going to do to the tax base of the county if they were all to do that? The property taxes currently paid by Marriott in the county are responsible for the quality of life that Kristina rightly brags about. Montgomery County boasts a terrific school system, terrific public goods, and all the things that make it a good place to raise a family and employ companies and train workers and have a good standard of living. That's all driven by the public goods created by the property tax base here, paid by Marriott and other companies equitably. So it really raises the thorny fairness issues.
But this is a competitive society, and should government be exempt from the rules of competition? I spoke with a Fairfax official who says that Fairfax is very aggressive in attracting business, but they're not about to come into Montgomery County and try to steal away our business. Let's take a listen.
We have a gentleman's agreement that we established more than 15 years ago when I first came to this organization, and that was with the other 15 or 16 jurisdictions in the metropolitan area, Washington and Maryland and suburban Virginia, and the gentleman's agreement was basically that we would not raid other jurisdictions, and we, Fairfax County, do not and never have actively sought business prospects from Montgomery County, Maryland, or any other jurisdiction in this area. On the other hand, companies come to us, and when that occurs, we provide them with every service that we would provide someone from outside of the area. But again, we do not actively look for, or inactively, we don't look for prospects in our neighboring jurisdictions.
Kristina Ellis, you just heard this Fairfax official say we don't raid Montgomery County for business.
Well, if I could just respond to that, that's awfully nice of him to say, but I think any community, any county, any region, any state, that is looking to develop its economic base and stay, and grow its business base, while they may not look to grab a business from another county or jurisdiction, they certainly always have their best attributes forward. I just came last week from a economic development training course, which just reiterated the fact from site consultants that a jurisdiction or a location is eliminated before it's chosen, meaning that before you realize that you're on the table, there are consultants and companies out there looking at you to see, your power capabilities, your water capabilities. So you always have to have your best foot forward through marketing materials like our new brochure. So while Fairfax may not, per se look to take a company, they certainly always have their best attributes forward as a way to get a company to take that first look at them. And that's what Montgomery County is doing as well.
Greg LeRoy, what should a county like Montgomery County do to attract and retain business?
I think it shouldn't be ashamed of its business climate. It shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that maybe its tax rates are marginally higher than another jurisdiction. Public goods have value. The reason Marriott's here in the first place and why it's thrived for 4 decades is there must be something right about Montgomery and the county in the first place. There must be some reason why so many other employers have thrived here for so long. The public investments generated by the tax revenues on those companies has paid off. And so...
but if what we're looking at are good schools, for instance, Fairfax can claim good schools as well. Fairfax can also claim closer proximity to Dulles Airport, which is important from the point of view of especially a hotelier. If you're in the position of the Montgomery County government, what do you do in order to keep a big employer like Marriott here?
Well, can I respond to that since I am in Montgomery County? I would just say that another key component is what every company is looking for, no matter the jurisdiction or location, and that's a quality workforce. And I believe that that's a key factor. The highly skilled employment base that we can offer is a key attribute in keeping companies here.
But Fairfax too.
Yeah, I think you shy away from doing company-specific deals. You focus on the public goods that are available to all employers. You try to treat them as equally as possible. If there are structural things that are major differences, you'll look at those, but you shy away from company-specific deals because it raises the fairness issues and it opens the floodgates.
And so who would be next?
Well, we've got lots of other major employers in the county. I don't want to plant any ruinous suggestions here. We all know who they are, but it's really a slippery slope when you start doing company-specific deals. It's one thing to compete on your overall tax and spend policy. It's another thing to do expensive company-specific deals. The tendency is to always overspend when you do company-specific deals. And when you overspend, you distort, and you shortchange yourself, and you undermine your public goods that created the good thing in the first place.
I'm afraid that exhausts our time. Thanks to Kristina Ellis from Montgomery County and Greg LeRoy from Good Jobs First. Still to come, got a good liver available. We'll look at the promise and ethics of organ donations. Ilona Popper has a poem. Wemmy winner Grace Griffith sings a tune for St. Patty's Day, and author Mark Hertzgaard on the prospects for our species' survival. But first, in memory of a rooster who didn't survive.
You see my little red rooster, please call her home. We're all here to honor and remember and finally celebrate, I think, the life of a rooster who brought us all a lot of joy. It's hard to imagine a more perilous environment for a rooster than to live right here with this busy street here and all the 13-year-old boys with slingshots and all the cats.
How many more roosters will have to perish before we finally get a sign up on Carroll Avenue saying rooster crossing? Stop the madness.
But I'd like to say to Chick Chick, wherever you are, thanks for making a lot of us on time for work.
He did suggest something of Takoma Park, and that he was a little quirky, a bit loud at times, but finally earthy and true and authentic, and wanting mostly, I think, a simple life a little closer to the earth, and struggling against all odds, against a world not particularly in step with his own life.
In this dream, they are coming to get me. I can smell fear, chilly, wet down the sides of my shirt. How bitter. They tell me, give us your tongue. We will let you use this stick instead. Try it out. It almost fits. A little rough. You can use it almost as well. You can't taste anything, but you can make most words, as long as you stick to the pointed sound. I think of, ich habe immer dein gedacht. Sleep, und möchte schlafen, dancing, aber du musst tanzen. Words like these, you won't need them anymore. In this dream, I hear fear in the hard beat, the heart in my body, thumping over and over under the skin, raising the skin, the rib cage, every single beat. How much can one heart stand? How long? I can taste fear in the pain between my legs, squeeze so long I can't even let go enough to pee, the closed thread urethra like the thinnest wire. In this dream, they are coming to get me. And the only choice left is to die first.
Hello and welcome to In Sickness and in Health. The doctor's words echo in your head. You have a good chance of returning to a normal active life, but only if you have a heart transplant to replace your own virus-ravaged organ. Where will another heart come from? The good news is there are many people who have agreed to donate their organs upon their death. The bad news is the need for a heart or lung, pancreas, liver, kidney, or bone marrow badly outstrips supply. Why the shortage? While we're alive, many of us would consider giving up a donor, organ, or tissue to save a loved one, but a stranger? How about when we die? Well, who wants to think about being chopped up for spare parts? And what if the doctor both knows you've agreed to be an organ donor and that 10 people need your organs right now? How can you be sure the doctor will do her utmost to save your life? Here to talk about the current state of organ donation is Sue Edwards, bioethicist at the Washington Hospital Center in the District of Columbia. Ms. Edwards has a PhD in philosophy, specializing in ethics. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Who can be a donor and what can they donate? I guess we have to split this into both a donor as a dead person and a living donor. Let's start with what you do when you die.
Okay. When we talk about persons donating organs after their death, pretty much anybody can be an organ donor. There is a sort of unofficial cutoff age of 70 years of age for what we call solid organs, hearts, livers, pancreas. But that's not written in stone. It depends a lot more on the physical health of the person. With respect to other tissues that can be donated, things like corneas, connective tissues, tendons, there often is no age limit. It depends, again, on the shape of the person and the physical condition of the particular tissue that we're looking at.
How young can you be as well?
There are, in fact, donations made from newborn babies. So it depends very much on what the need is. Sadly, actually, it's very difficult to get donations from newborns because there just aren't that many that die in such a way that we can actually use their organs. But there are a lot of newborn children waiting for transplants, so
right.
It's an area of major concern.
And what about your own health? I mean, say you're a smoker, does that rule you out pretty much for your lungs and other things?
It may for being a lung donor,
right?
But not necessarily for other things, again, like corneas, like tissues. It very much depends on exactly what tissue or organ we're looking at, what the health of the person was. A lot of persons are concerned that, for example, if they have a history of cancer, they can't be a donor. And while that tends to generally be true, it isn't universally so. So it's always better to sort of, if you're interested in donating, go ahead and inform your family, your friends, your physician that that's something you'd be willing to do, and let the medical decision be made at the time that it's appropriate.
Right, so your genes aren't examined for what may lie,
no,
lie
absolutely
in for the donation. And it's very important to tell your family, isn't it?
Absolutely. We spend a lot of time educating people about the importance of filling out organ donor cards or perhaps indicating on their license that they'd like to be an organ donor, and that is, in fact, very important. But the reality is that there isn't a doctor pretty much in the world who will take the organs from a deceased person unless the next of kin consents. So it is eminently important that you tell your family or anybody who might be asked after your death what your wishes were about organ donation, because that's what they'll base it on.
Right, and it doesn't cost anything as the
No,
donor,
absolutely not. There is no charge to the donor.
Yeah. What about the living donation? That's a whole different field, and it's very much restricted to, I suppose, people who know each other pretty well.
For the most part, that's true. For a very long time, living donation was only allowed between family members, and there were two reasons for that. One was that you were much more likely to have successful donation between people who had a similar genetic connection. Just the chances of rejection were considerably less. But it was also felt sort of for psychological reasons that it would be too traumatic for somebody other than someone who had a very, very close connection to the patient to donate. As our technology has gotten better, and we've gotten better at figuring out how to manage the problems of rejection, of having the organ not be accepted by the body, those strictures have been expanded a little bit. There are programs in the country that will allow donations from people who are not actually related. Spouses, for example, very close friends. In cases of persons who belong to a religious order, perhaps one of their order mates, whatever the correct term is.
Yeah.
And there have been, in fact, cases, too, where people have directed that an organ be donated to a person that they knew, perhaps not terribly well, but that they wanted to have that organ go to. That's raised some ethical concerns about how far you might allow that kind of thing to go.
Right, can you donate to your favorite star?
Right.
Can you...
Or more concern, can you stipulate that your organs not go to a particular group?
Right.
I don't want my organs to go to convicted criminals. I don't want my organs to go to people from a certain country, that kind of thing.
Okay. You are psychologically investigated, if you like, if you're going to be a living donor, because it's quite a difficult thing to do, and I suppose your own health has to be certified because they don't want the organ donation to actually do harm to you. What organs would that involve then that you can donate whilst you're still alive?
Well, for the most part, it's pretty much limited to kidneys. There have been a few cases where parents have donated lobes of a liver, or perhaps even parts of a lung to children. That's pretty rare, and it hasn't been overly successful, so it's not something that tends to be promoted. And then, of course, there's bone marrow, which many of us don't think of it as an organ, and it's not in the sense of being a solid organ, but it certainly is something that a living person can donate, and of course blood.
And that's donated not to somebody who's necessarily close, the
Right.
bone marrow.
Right. That can be donated to pretty much anybody that you match with. As a matter of fact, the likelihood of finding someone who matches your blood type and the other genetic components that need to be matched is not great, so they basically will take it from wherever they can find it.
How about the fears of being an organ donor? There is the problem of, is it against my religion? A lot of people fear that or assume that it is. And also, what happens at your funeral if a doctor's been at you?
Right, absolutely, and there's a lot of concern in the community about how that would affect funeral arrangements and so on. As it turns out, the process of donating an organ in no way affects funeral arrangements. People can still have open caskets. The body isn't disfigured in any way that would be noticeable by anybody. There might be very tiny scars, but they would be hidden by clothing. Or in some other place that you wouldn't see. With regard to religions, most major religions do in fact accept organ donation, and in some cases even strongly encourage it as an act of human kindness.
What about the fear, which is very real for many people, about not being dead or being dead, allowed to die just a little sooner than otherwise might
there's a
happen?
wonderful scene from one of the Monty Python movies, which name escapes me, but where somebody has signed up to be an organ donor, and sure enough, the organ getters come along to get him while he's still quite alive, and he keeps pointing out, but I'm not finished using it yet, and yet they take it from him. And that's a legitimate concern for a lot of people, but it's not something that's based in reality. The way that the system works is the process of even considering whether a person would be a potential organ donor doesn't take place until the patient has been declared dead. And then it's a different team of medical professionals who take over and who then pursue the organ donation process. As many people are aware, there's sort of this term brain death that's thrown about a lot, and I think people are a little concerned because it sounds kind of odd. It sounds like perhaps there's a different kind of death that we use when we want to get an organ from somebody. And that's very unfortunate because in reality, there's only one kind of dead. You're either dead or you're alive.
Yeah.
There are, however, because of our technological advances, different ways in which we determine that you have died. Once upon a time, if you just weren't breathing, we pretty much figured you were dead. And then we got better at listening to heart sounds. We got stethoscopes, and we realized that if a heart wasn't beating, that meant somebody's dead. Now we have significant technology that allows us to actually measure the activity of a brain. And when there ceases to be activity of a brain, the person's dead.
But there is this pressure to get the organs out very, very fast, or they're
There are some
destroyed.
time
You have
limits.
to be, right.
There are some time limits, and we try to be very cognizant of that. But those time limits don't take effect until the person is dead. So you're not counting, if you will, until the time that the person has actually stopped living. And then you have some time constraints. But most of those things can happen fairly quickly. There are in virtually every area of the country what they call organ procurement agencies who have a system in place. They're ready to go when they're called. They are not called until the appropriate time, but they are ready to go the minute that they are.
There's a different definition about how long the heart has stopped beating before you're really dead. And the Washington area is starting something very unusual.
Right. Actually, let me backtrack a little bit. When we're talking about that, that's a system of organ donation that they call non-heart-beating organ donors. In most cases that I think people are familiar with, we talk about taking organs from people who are brain dead, who've been declared dead on the basis of neurological criteria. However, there is a possibility for getting organs from people who have died, quote, the old-fashioned way. Their heart stopped beating. And in fact, yes, there's been some question about how long one might wait to be sure that a person was dead. There are programs in some areas of the country, Pittsburgh being one, where they actually they have people who are on life-sustaining therapies. They withdraw those therapies, and then they wait a certain amount of time to be sure that the heart has stopped and the person is really dead. Then they take the organs. At our particular hospital in Washington, the Washington Hospital Center, we were a little uncomfortable with that kind of procedure because how do you decide, is 3 minutes enough, is 5 minutes enough, is 10 minutes enough? But we do, in fact, have a program in place that we call the Rapid Organ Recovery Program. And the way that that works is when a person is declared dead, and they are just declared dead the way that anybody would be declared dead if they had a traumatic injury or what have you. What happens then is lines are placed through one of the veins in the leg that allow a very ice-cold fluid to flow in and to help preserve the organs. Once that's occurred, then we've got a little bit of extra time. And we can go and get family and get consent and whatnot. But it's very important to note that if family doesn't consent, all that comes out and there is no
So there's no
additional
way
change.
anyone could possibly not be dead when
Right, no, they're well and truly dead. They've already been declared that way.
Let's take a look at the number of people waiting for organs both in the Washington area and nationwide. If people want to be a donor, how do they do it? There's a card that they're meant to fill in?
Well, there's a
carry
couple
around
of
with
ways
them?
in this area specifically. D.C., Maryland, and Virginia all have the option for you to indicate on your driver's license if you'd like to be an organ donor. And that's pretty simple. When you get your license renewed, you can just tell them that that's what you want. There are also cards that are available from a variety of different sources, the Washington Regional Transplant Consortium being one of those. Most of the hospitals have them available. You can get them from pretty much anybody. The best thing, of course, as you mentioned earlier, is to tell your family what you want to have happen and make sure that they know, and make sure your physician knows.
Right. On these cards, we'll take a look at a donor card. You have the option of saying which organs you want to donate and whether you don't want your body to go to science. That's another option. And there's a special section for special wishes. Just quickly, a couple of examples of special wishes that would be listed.
Primarily, they're put in place just in case a person has a specific religious belief about what they'd like to have happen after the donation has occurred. For the most part, your choices are pretty much limited to saying what you'd like to have donated or not, or whether you'd like to have a body part donated as well.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. Very big thank you to Washington Hospital Center's Sue Edwards for joining me in the coffee house to talk about the whys, the hows, and the ethics of organ donation. I'm Kathy Christensen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
down the lanes of the silken swift, maverick angels sing, muffled drums of their wishing drums, out where the river bells ring. Scent of foxfire and columbine hangs in the air like frost. Fog rolls past the midnight gates, deep in the Limberlost. Like a dream cloak around my neck, thunder is heavy in the air. Sky is streaked with angel fire. Oh, did you carve it there? Do the rain clouds have a father? And who knows the meaning of the snow? When the morning stars sang as one who laid the cornerstone. Fog rolls down the mountainside, blue sky turns to gray.
Well, hello.
Hi, David.
I'd like to welcome Grace Griffith to the musical tradition segment of Takoma Coffee House.
I'm glad to be here.
It's good to have you here. That didn't sound like your typical Celtic song.
Well, actually, the authors, Pete and Maura Kennedy,
Well,
thought
it's
of me after they
true,
wrote.
It's an Irish name, but
Yeah. Well, the story behind that song is they were up walking in the misty woods and saw a bunch of deer, and they came home and wrote this, in their words, strange song, weird song, thought of me because they thought it sounded Celtic.
right. However, you do a lot more than just Celtic material.
That's true.
I guess mostly because of your connection with Connemara and before that Hazelwood. But now you've branched out quite a bit and taken in a lot more genre.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages of being a song interpreter. You know, you can kind of pick and choose like
Yeah.
any song that appeals to you in the garden, and I do like to do a variety of songs.
Now, you don't write a lot of your songs. You're an interpreter of songs.
That's right. I don't have, the muse to write has not called me,
Right.
and there are so many people writing wonderful songs that I'm glad to have heard.
And you do have things happen where songwriters come up to you and say, you know, I thought of you when I was writing this. And they actually, that completes the process for the songwriter, is to have the song delivered.
And you know, to me, a songwriter is very much a part of the song. I enjoy kind of knowing their histories. I do a fair number of songs by local writers who I know, and that's kind of a pleasure for me.
But you also do ones that are not local writers.
That's true.
Got any for us?
My all-time favorite song, I think this is a song everybody should do. A lot of people have recorded it and performed it, but never gets old, by one of the heroes of
And who is that?
Richard Thompson.
And the title of the song? This is
Dimming-
just stalling while you get your capo on. You know?
I appreciate it, too.
Okay.
Dimming of the Day.
A great tune. Take it away.
This old house is falling down around my ears. I'm drowning in a river of my tears. When all my will is gone, you hold me sway. At the dimming of the day, you pull me like the moon pulls on days that come to keep us far apart. A broken promise or a broken heart. When all my will is gone and wheeled away, then I need you at the dimming of the day. Oh, come the night, you're only what I want. Come the night, you could be my confidant. I see you on the street in company. Oh, why don't you come and ease your mind with me? I'm living for the day we will away. Oh, I need you at the dimming of the day. Oh, I need you at the dimming of the day.
You know, it's just hard to come back up and jump into the interview. I want to just kind of sit in the wash of that song. It's
That's
a
a
great
powerful
tune.
song, yeah.
Amazing stuff. New album coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about it. We talked about this briefly, but I want you to go into a little bit elaborate.
Well, it's sort of similar to my first album, which is called Grace, in that it's quite an eclectic mixture of things. There's traditional Irish and Scottish, and there's, of course, works by contemporary writers. I've got a Irish Dement song on there and a song by Jane Siberry, and lots of percussion and, you know, drums, and not electric drums, rock and roll drums,
No,
but
handheld
hand
percussion.
drums, yeah.
Yeah.
And I really had some fun making it.
Will this be on Blick Street
Blick
again?
Street Records of California, that's right.
Okay. And let's see, what would you, is there a single on there? You think there's one that jumps out at you more than another, where when you finished it you said, yeah, this is the one?
There's two that I really love. One is by my hero, Doogie McClain, his song,
yes.
I Feel So Near. I
Okay.
really love doing that. And then the Jane Siberry song, Bound by the Beauty. That was, I know my label particularly likes that version.
Okay. What are you going to take us out with?
This is a song for my father, and Bob's going to play some Irish fiddle style on it for me. This is my father's favorite song.
Okay, and we know he's out there watching.
He certainly will be.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
love you. They will drink to old Rosenberg. They will drink to old Rosenberg. They'll drink to old Rosenberg. And when my companions are joyous, they will drink to old Rosenberg. I've traveled this country all over, and now to another I go. And I know good quarters are waiting to welcome old Rosenberg, to welcome old Rosenberg, to welcome old Rosenberg. I know good quarters are waiting to welcome old Rosenberg.
Just ahead, Earth Odyssey author Mark Hertsgaard on Writer's Block.
Welcome to Writer's Block. Most of us have heard the phrase, waste not, want not, and yet few of us really take it to heart. We're more focused on all the things we want versus all the things we waste. Consumption is the new religion, at least here in the Western world, and it has a price, especially in terms of the environment. Writer Mark Hertsgaard found himself posing the question of human survival in the face of global warming, a damaged ozone layer, and countless environmental atrocities. He decided to examine the environment and its effect on individuals throughout the world. The result is his book, Earth Odyssey, Around the World in Search of Our Environmental Future. Mark Hertsgaard has written 3 previous books. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, The Atlantic Monthly, and other publications both in the States and overseas. He teaches nonfiction writing at Johns Hopkins University and lives in Takoma Park. Welcome back to the Coffee House.
It's always great to be here.
So you wanted to do this journey, this Earth Odyssey. Tell me why.
Well, I suppose originally, to be honest, the idea was just to make a trip around the world. I think like a lot of people, I'd always fantasized about doing that.
Yeah.
And then after that idea settled in for about a week, I thought I better do something socially useful. And I'd been following this issue for a long time. And this was in 1991, so the Cold War was just over.
Right.
And the nuclear arms race had not ended, but had been severely diminished. And yet,
the Berlin Wall was
yeah,
down.
A lot of big changes in the world. And yet, some of the world's top environmental experts were saying, okay, but now we've in some ways got an even tougher problem, which are these longer-term issues of global warming and population growth, and these are going to be much, much harder to turn around. And because they have so much momentum behind them, the 1990s, they said, were going to be the decisive decade that would determine whether we as a species would survive or not. And I didn't necessarily agree with that, but I thought it was a very interesting way to pose the question, and that was what I set off around the world to investigate, was whether we as a species would react quickly enough to save ourselves.
And you opened the book with the scene in China. Would you talk about that, where you...
Sure, yeah. Yeah, the opening scene was a day in Chongqing, which is a city on the Yangtze River, big industrial city, and my friend and interpreter Jen Bin and I snuck into a factory that the local environmental officials had said, oh, we closed that down, we're cleaning up here in Chongqing. And very interesting, you know, we actually talked our way into that factory, which is not something you could have done 5 years ago.
Right.
And we just found our way into the back of the factory, and there, pouring out of the back of the factory, were 4 different waste streams. And the last one was the worst, and it was like a waterfall of boiling milk. And what it was chlorine.
Oh.
Pouring out the back of this factory that was supposedly closed.
Oh, my.
And then, before we could get out, because of course we had to go out a different way since we were sort of not supposed to be there in the first place, then we got caught in a chemical explosion of chlorine gas, which was pretty frightening. Because that, of course, was the gas they used in the poison gas attacks of World War I. And I remember after we finally sort of ran through the gas and got out of the factory, we were waiting for the bus to go back downtown, and Jen Bin, who was not a militant environmentalist, to put it mildly, this had finally gotten through to him after 4 weeks of our traveling around China, and he was always saying, oh, we're used to this, we're used to this. He was behind me, and I remember he said, my poor country.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And yet there are many places around the world where you basically see that happen again and again.
Oh, sure.
People are feeling that my poor country. And when you're in Africa, and I found very interesting how you would contrast the different countries, at the sort of barren terrain in parts of Africa, and then you talk about, you know, America and what we've got going. And
yeah, to me, that was both China and Africa, as you mentioned. They brought home to me what's probably the single biggest conclusion of this trip, which I did not expect when I left, which was that the biggest environmental problem in the world today is not global warming or ozone depletion or species loss, as serious as those things are. It's poverty. It is poverty and the very understandable desire of people like Jen Bin to escape from poverty.
Yes.
And you see that in Africa very much. These are, I traveled among the Dinka tribe in southern Sudan, and these are people who are literally dropping dead in front of you because of the civil war and the starvation there. And it really does make you look very differently at the life we live back here. And what you said in your wonderful introduction about waste not, want not, and here in America we assume that so many of the things that we want are things that we need.
Right.
And when you travel among the Dinka, you get a whole new perspective on what's a luxury and what is a necessity.
Well, and you also talk about Brazil and the population levels there versus population in America, and how some people consume more than others in parts of the world. Would you explain that? In terms
Yeah, well, there it had to do with a friend of mine. I remember I was passing through San Francisco on the way to Brazil from Asia, and I saw a bunch of friends of mine in San Francisco, and we were having dinner, and I was telling them about the Dinka, and one of my friends, who's a kind of a left-of-center guy, journalist, he got kind of irritated with me, and he said, you know, what's the big deal here, Mark? God, it's not our fault that they're starving. Why don't they stop having so many kids? Which is a very common reaction in the United States. And it makes a lot of sense on one level, because you figure, well, you know, population growth, that adds to the environmental burden. Yet the fact is that the average American baby will consume 13 times as many goods and produce 13 times as much pollution in the course of his or her lifetime as a Brazilian baby will. So my friend in San Francisco had 2 kids. He had the equivalent of 26 Brazilian babies, and needless to say, he did not feel that he was part of the global population problem.
Yeah, you make that very clear, and you also talk about the automobile in terms of how that also plays into the consuming that we're doing in this country. I mean, but all countries are buying into the automobile now, or anyway, they're trying to.
Yes, well, it's very understandable. I saw that in every country. And, you know, since 1950, the human population on this planet has doubled.
Yeah.
The car population has increased by a factor of 10.
Ugh.
And you see in Bangkok and cities like Bangkok where there are just these horrific traffic jams. I remember arriving in Bangkok at midnight, and the traffic jams were like Friday afternoon in Los Angeles, rush hour. And what can you say? What can we as Americans say to people about cars? It's very understandable that they want to have cars. All of us have cars.
Yeah.
And so somehow we as a species have got to get a grip on this. I think we're really addicted to cars, and it's very understandable. They're incredible machines. As one of the sources in the book says, a French friend of mine said, They're the most beautiful toy in history. But if 1 billion of us use them to get to work every day, we're going to choke. And not just on the exhaust. What I think is going to be the big issue in the world, and we're seeing it now in the United States too, over the next few years with the car, is going to be the traffic jams. That's what's really going to just stop up these cities from working anymore. Because most cities in the world were built before cars, and they simply can't accommodate this vast new influx of cars. And yet, the dilemma is the car is the single biggest industry in the world, and the fuel is the second biggest. So we're addicted to it in an economic sense too. So somehow we as a species have got to make a big U-turn.
Yeah. And that goes back to what you were saying about poverty, and in terms of how countries that are developing and climbing out of poverty and climbing out of not having anything. I mean, the car is also a status symbol. It's not just you also talk about the history of the car in this country in terms of how we had a fine transit system that General Motors and...
Yeah, my favorite story of corporate skullduggery, I think, was the way that GM, along with Standard Oil and a few other companies, basically stole a monopoly status for the automobile. They stole the American transportation system, beginning in the 1930s. And we know this because of a U.S. Justice Department investigation. They set up a front company called National City Lines. And they literally went around to my home city of Baltimore, to Los Angeles, many of the major cities, and they would buy up the little private companies that ran bus service and the trolley lines, and then they would literally tear out the tracks. In fact, any of you who've seen that movie, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, that's the backstory of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Is the freeways.
Oh my.
And of course, then the idea was you build the freeways. And in the 1950s, who was it that ran the Federal Highway Administration that got the money through for it was the top stockholder in General Motors. I'm not a conspiracist, but sometimes it is interesting the way these things work out.
But your basic conclusion then is that we have to make some drastic changes in just the way that we approach personally how we approach our lives. And
personally and as a society, we need to basically rewire our entire technological civilization. And the good news is that we can make a lot of money doing this.
That's what you call it, the Global Green Deal?
The Global Green Deal. That's just my word for it. But this is something that top government planners in Germany and Japan see this coming, and even some top corporate planners at AT&T, for example, talk about we need to rewire our entire technological civilization. We need to use lights, for example, that are energy efficient. We need to be insulating our buildings so that we don't need as much energy in the first place. And as it happens, all of this is very labor-intensive activity. And so, you know, as a species, what has gotten us here is this thing up here. And it's this, and probably a lot of this, that will determine whether we as a species survive these next years. But it's certainly in our grasp. And we can make money solving the environmental crisis, but it's going to take some real political leadership, and that means pushing from the bottom. That means people like you getting out there.
Right. Well, you talk about moral conviction, which is not always a mainstay of capitalism, particularly.
Capitalism is the most immoral economic system in history.
Yeah, it really. I mean, but the changes have to start on that level. I mean,
well, it seems like we're stuck with capitalism for the moment.
Right.
And there's a lot. The market is a very powerful mechanism. If we can channel it in a direction that helps the environment rather than, as is currently the case, harms the environment, there's a lot of progress that can be made.
Right. And just to finish up, you interviewed Václav Havel, who also talked about the personal conviction, moral conviction. He calls it apolitical politics or something?
Yes, apolitical politics. Havel's, to me, very important because obviously, having spent all these years traveling around, it's very easy to succumb to despair.
Right.
And I make a distinction between optimism and hope. It is very hard to be optimistic because the trends are going in the wrong direction. There's no sense denying that. But hope is what Havel taught me. And if anybody had the right to give up on something because it looked hopeless, it was Havel during the Cold War when he was sitting in solitary confinement. But he stuck with it, and by the end of the decade, he was in the presidential palace. And I think that's the kind of lesson that we as a species have to try and incorporate.
Thank you. And you do say that in the end of the book. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Many thanks to Mark Hertzgaard for joining me in the coffee house. Again, his new book is called Earth Odyssey. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
That's it for the March edition. See you next month in the Coffee House.